Hey guys, before we dive into this week's episode, I've got a little offer for you. This year I launched my online studio, Mindful Moment, and I'd love for you to prioritise your own well-being and come and have a free trial. You'll get unlimited 24-hour access to my growing library of meditations, mindfulness techniques, breathwork and movement sessions, yoga classes, sound healing recordings, and more. Whether you got 2 minutes or a full day, and whether you want to improve your sleep, feel calmer, or let go of damaging thought patterns, there are sessions there to support you. All from the comfort of your own home on your own timetable. Go to lilysilverton.com/mindful-moment to start your free 7-day trial today.
I wouldn't work at full speed all the time. I did say a long time ago, I'm really not a workaholic. I don't work just for the sake of working. And I do spend an awful lot of time in my own time. I don't know whether it's downtime. I'm interested in my brain. So when my brain goes into overdrive, I potentially find that relaxing, even though maybe it's not.
Welcome to Priorities, the podcast about the things in life that really matter. I'm your host, journalist and coach Lily Silverton, and each week, along with a roster of incredible guests, I'll be exploring how priorities inform and transform our lives, sharing mindset tips, strategies, and inspiration to help you prioritize your own life. We'll be covering what we think is important and unimportant, what we'd like to work on more, and the moments that changed our priorities and lives forever. I hope you enjoy. My guest today is one of sustainable fashion's leading pioneers and thought leaders, Orsola de Castro. A true trailblazer, in 1997, Orsola founded From Somewhere, a label designing clothes made entirely from disregarded materials. In 2006, she co-founded the British Fashion Council's groundbreaking initiative Aesthetica, which was London Fashion Week's showcase for labels designing sustainably. And in 2013, to mark the tragic Rana Plaza factory collapse in Dhaka, Bangladesh, she co-founded Fashion Revolution, which has since become a huge worldwide campaign which continues to raise awareness of the social and environmental catastrophes in our global fashion supply chains. Orsola's first book, Loved Clothes Last, came out last month. Welcome, Orsola.
Thank you.
It's so lovely to have you here.
It's so lovely to be here and to reconnect with you after such a long time.
Oh, likewise. How's your day been so far, Orsola?
It's been sunny. It's sunny in London, so when it's sunny outside, it's sunny inside and sunny all over. So good so far.
Makes a huge difference. Are you a routine kind of person? Do you like to have a routine?
No, not at all. Not at all. I am completely unroutine. The only periods I managed to have routine was when I was rearing children, because I knew that they needed it. But I myself, not at all.
What happens when you try and have a routine?
I don't even bother to try. I don't like it. I really like, I guess there are things that become routinary, like I have coffee every morning, but I don't have coffee at a certain time, nor do I have a particular ritual apart from making it. I'm just not that kind of person. I like things to be much more spontaneous. I don't like planning so much. I really hate making lists. So I just take the day and the life as in the same way as they come.
Really fluid approach, which actually ties into what you've said about priorities. Because when I asked you to list your priorities, you said I couldn't possibly do that.
Yeah.
That would be incredibly limiting. So talk to me about that. I want to know what's important to you, but we're not going to limit you by any specific 3.
Well, it's, as I was saying, I don't like lists. And I don't like priorities in the sense that there are so many in my life, whether it's, the good of the world, the good of my children, my cat, my wardrobe, my everything. And I don't tend to have, I don't live by regiments, nor do I live by dogmas. And so I feel that priorities can shift throughout the day. Some days my priorities might be very big and linked with my job and my profession. But other days they're not. They're very small and have a totally different flavor. And yet I value them both. And I value the freedom to be able to take my life spontaneously and uncharted and unplanned and the freedom to change my mind, the freedom to discover something new, the freedom to change my road along my journey. I mean, these are things I value hugely. And I know I've lived my life in an unconventional way, and I thoroughly intend to continue doing so.
Quite rightly. Where do you think, because I think a lot of people listening, and myself included, would be almost quite envious of that approach to life, of feeling very free at all times. Have you always been like that?
Yeah. I mean, I am what used to be known as, dyspraxic, dyslexic. Now, joy of language is neurodivergent, which I very, very identify with. And so programming, logic don't sit very well with my brain. My brain is programmed to be discombobulated. And within that discombobulation, I've grown everything that I have done. So my brand from somewhere is absolutely 100% the product of a neurodivergent brain, putting little bits together of fabrics that don't necessarily want to be together or weren't designed to be together. The freedom to go from being a designer to finding myself as a kind of a campaigner, that is kind of part of the same, not having fixed for myself a journey, nor an expectation of what that journey should look like. And I have absolutely 100% always been like this. I mean, I was happily ensconced in school in Rome until the day that I decided that I wanted to leave and come to London, which I did. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's how things work for me.
You grew up in Rome.
I grew up in between Rome and Venice. I was born in Rome, but my family is very, very much Venetian. And so I was brought up in between the two very much. More in Rome because I went to school in Rome, but all of my holidays and family time was around Venice and there, around there.
Let's talk a little bit about your work and about sustainability, because it's obviously at the core of everything you do.
Yes.
So how did your interest in sustainability start? Because it started way before it was quote unquote fashionable.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't actually I would say that I was born with interest in sustainability in the sense that, sustainability is what keeps us alive. And ever since I was a child, I was interested in history, interested in evolution, interested in common sense. These are traits that I have had for as long as I can remember. And they gave me somehow a clear judgment on what I saw happening around me. But my approach has always been 100% creative. So I started with clothes. I started with making clothes and making clothes from clothes that already existed or fabrics that already existed. But again, that was in 1997 with my brand From Somewhere. That very much felt like a labor of love and creativity, not because there was a need. I became aware of the need as I moved along, as I started realizing the waste that the fashion industry produced. And that in turn informed a whole different way of thinking as to what I could do for this waste. So originally it was my creativity that was of service. And then it became my passion, my capacity to speak, my capacity to be articulate, and above all, my capacity to convince people. And, those all were put to the service of this industry and how this industry has an obligation to turn and become sustainable. But again, I do start from the point of view that it isn't sustainability that it's the trend, it's excess that is the trend. It's what we are witnessing right now that has completely lost control. And I guess having been in this industry long enough, I've had, an opportunity to try and at least be a part of steering it back.
Do you feel like things are changing?
I do now. Not enough, not fast enough, and not rigorously enough, and not deeply enough. But the change is happening on a side of the industry which isn't the mainstream. The change is really, really happening with the smaller, the emerging brands, those brands that are nimble enough to make the profound changes that need to be made in order to become sustainable at this day and age. But I think that the primary change that we're seeing is in younger generations, and in particular after a year of COVID and Black Lives Matter. There is so much more awareness of the impact of the fashion industry, not just environmental, but social. There is so much more aware of the fact that this is an industry that was designed to exploit both people and planet. There is finally a very clear, almost geographical understanding that the way that the fashion industry operates is similar, if not the same, to the way that imperialism and colonialism operated in other countries. These felt like complicated issues until quite recently, and now it feels that they're on the surface and somehow much more understandable. That is a massive change.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. It's the human impact that I think is being really, truly understood. We've known each other for a long time and worked together when I was at magazines, and you were at Estetica when you started Estetica.
Yeah.
And I think of that now of fashion weeks. I obviously haven't done them for quite a few years, but I think of how you guys were the outliers. So, there was the regular shows going on, and then you had Estetica on the side, where by now it feels so much more integrated. And as you say,
much more.
You don't really hear of any brilliant, prominent new young brands who aren't considering sustainability on all levels.
In one way or another, yeah. I mean, I was really delighted I was a judge for a New Gen, 2 years ago, last year. And I mentored a lot of the British Fashion Council cohort. And yes, there are designers who really cannot take it upon themselves to switch all of their fabrics to sustainable or, suddenly, upcycle. But if they're not approaching that, they will be approaching another element. So that might be about inclusivity. It might be about gender neutrality. It might be about, looking at another aspect, which nevertheless leads to either a sustainable or an ethical approach. And it is completely integrated. And I would say inevitably so, because something so fresh and strong and new as actually wanting to save the planet, which was considered worthy, and I have to say it with that tone of voice, but, until quite recently, it has now, it's clear now that this is the only avant-garde that we can consider, because without it, there's not an avant to look forward to. We won't be able to move. We won't continue to evolve unless we take certain measures. And these measures are moral and environmental. So,
yeah, absolutely. Do you find it tiring what you do? I always think when I talk to activists and hear about burnout in terms of banging a drum over and over again. How do you feel about it when you're talking to people and you're talking about such huge global issues, as well as huge global supply chains that, as you say, are incredibly hard to change?
It's odd. It's an odd question. Somebody asked me the same in a podcast, and she said, "Oh, I'm exhausted. And how exhausted are you?" And my reaction was to say, "Yes, me too." But it was more out of sympathy. No, actually, I don't find it tiring. I work an awful lot, but I have to say that at this point in time, I am doing something which I know I'm doing well. And I'm doing it exactly as I wish to do it. You see, I am very, very privileged in many ways, because I've managed to cut a space for myself without ever being paid by the brands. So I actually can say exactly what I want. And that is a really, amazing situation to be in. There aren't many that can say, I'm actually, I'm not being paid by anyone in here. So this conversation that I'm having is on my terms, and that is invigorating rather than tiring. I guess if I were sort of, confronting pillars and frustrations and, it probably would be different. But I am very lucky that I've constructed a position for myself which reflects the person that I am and the person that I want to be. Obviously, this has taken an enormous amount of time. I am a very old woman. I am a granny. I am 54. So, but that also is something that isn't spoken of. The joy of actually being an older woman in this kind of space, doing what the fuck she wants, which is what I'm doing. And so, yes, I do get tired from a physical point of view, because I do find myself overworking, overspeaking, overthinking. But at the end of the day, it's exactly where I want to be. So it's a funny tired, because it's the same difference between excited and nervous. So I'm always, perpetually in between being tired, but being very invigorated to do more.
I guess when you're doing something that you love and that makes so much sense, then it's very rewarding, even if it is tiring.
Very rewarding. Absolutely very rewarding. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of an obvious point, but how do you feel about sort of the Instagram sustainability movement, social media sustainability, lots of younger people coming up and creating accounts dedicated to it? Obviously wasn't something that was around when you started Aesthetica or even Fashion Revolution.
No, not really. So I've got a double feeling here, in the sense that obviously I do follow, search, know, discover, and I have the utmost respect for many of them. Although I do say that the conversation has become overtly simplistic at the minute. And a lot of the people who are opening, sustainability accounts and all of that have not worked in the fashion industry. And, I am talking about fashion from the point of view of the fashion industry. I'm not talking about fashion from exclusively 100% for, consumers or, and I do believe that an understanding of the industry is imperative in order to be able to really influence changes.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of very complicated nuances. Yeah, I mean, the fashion revolution is very much about accuracy when we speak. And at the minute, there is this huge, anti-fast fashion movement that you'd think that luxury is not culpable simply because it's never mentioned. I mean, that makes me furious. The fact that we are putting culpability very firmly on one sector of the industry and somehow letting the other one that is just as culpable, 100% scot-free, which they are using totally to their own benefit. Equally,
there's so many social connotations with that as well.
Oh,
what we're saying
totally.
is,
but it's
this type of fashion sort of can get away with it.
Absolutely, but it isn't just that. It's the fact that, the origins of almost everything is from that sector of the industry. Yeah. So, the real true exploitation, the real true, colonialism, racism within this industry, it's linked to the whole of the industry, not one sector of the industry. The luxury sector jumped at the globalization of fashion just as fast as everybody else did. And, they have exploited resources and people just as much as everybody else does. So, it's this without, in my case, I am, equally livid with the cheap fashion sector that refuses to slow down, to acknowledge, their impact on the planet and on 17-year-olds who are literally, we've affected their culture so drastically that they really do want to buy 3 outfits per day. So it's the entirety of the fashion industry that I condemn, and I do use the word condemn for several reasons. And so I think that sometimes when you don't have a robust understanding of how the industry operates, literally from the seed of the, non-sustainable or organic cotton, whichever way, but from far up that far, all the way to the end of life of the garment, which is, we are also in the fashion supply chain. I do feel that many of the conversations have dulled up. Nevertheless, we do need the conversations in the first place. So I just wish that people, together with information, were to exhort others to take time and actually find out in depth, what really interests them, what's their entry point topic, and then study that and do it with, master your opinion. And the only way to master your opinions is to have a very solid background of knowledge behind. Without that, an opinion is just a flighty, slightly irrelevant thing. And I think that this is not a message that I see often in this new wave of sustainability conversations on social media that you mentioned before.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it applies across all areas as well.
Yes.
In that anyone can suddenly be an expert. I see it with, meditation, of people who have been meditating for a couple of months and then they're teaching on Instagram or
exactly that. There is this sense of it's the negation of skills.
Yeah.
And it's part of a way bigger problem, because we berate others for negating skills to people, but then I guess there's cultural appropriation. This, I guess, potentially we could be skills appropriation, but there's a huge amount of that. And I mean, in fashion, it started, I remember, Dan, do you remember the celebrity collections? We're still plagued by them, I guess, but it is just something that we do,
My work centres on helping people better navigate this challenging modern world, so I'm very excited that this episode of Priorities is sponsored by Anatomy, a London-based modern apothecary that provides natural solutions to support the stresses of daily life. Anatomy's range of vitamins, health supplements, and therapeutic essential oils have been developed with the help of sports scientists, nutritionists, and aromatologists, and they combine the best of nature and science to create products that support your essential health and well-being. I've been using their defense and immune support vitamins all winter, and I love their sleep and recovery oils. I put a little of their blue chamomile insomnia blend on my wrists and the soles of my feet before I get into bed, and always find it helps settle my body and mind. Anatomy are kindly offering any Priorities listener 20% off their first order with the code LILY20. Check them out on www.anatomy.co. I thought something else while you were talking about luxury versus fast fashion as well, that really the way in which the luxury market operates now, because of all the changes, it operates a little bit closer to a fast fashion model anyway, with pre-collections and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. So I don't know enough about the history right now. It's something I've been meaning to look up. But in my mind, from my memory, it was luxury fashion that started the multiple seasons. And that was in order to counteract the quick drops of the fast fashion. So in that sense as well, who started the madness? Yes, I know that cheap fashion started the hyper production and uber quantities that we are seeing right now. They were capable of that, and they certainly exploited that. But, luxury fashion is pretty voluminous too, if we consider all of the accessories, if we consider all of the various diffusion collections. I mean, at one point, brands had one, if not two, diffusion collections, which were produced potentially in the same factories or very close by, or by people with similar skills to the ones that make, I guess, the better quality fast fashion. But, it is, again, it's this, we can't split them. One is the product of the other. Luxury fashion could have had a very different approach when they moved to China. They could have gone saying, okay, we'll bring our knowledge, we'll bring our know-how, we'll bring our techniques, but we'll also bring the dignity that we've been imparting on our workers. In Europe, there were moments where there were pockets of real dignity, and I guess made in Italy, made in France represent that. But of course, the minute that they could go Eastern Europe or somewhere else, they did in order to pay less. So it was very, very, very deliberate. This exploitation was 100% deliberate. It didn't happen. It was designed to happen. And as a result, the entirety of the fashion industry is culpable of very deliberately exploiting people and planet for the sake of their own profits, which were then not equally distributed throughout the supply chain. People tend to think that if you pay 1,500 euros for a bag, that the makers of that bag will be paid more fairly. They won't.
Mm. Talk to us about your book, Orsola, that came out last month.
My book? Yeah, so my book is called Loved Clothes Last. It came out last week. It's published by Penguin Life. It's a huge, massive dream come true. I'd never, ever thought that I could write. I mean, I know that I can speak. And I'd written, maybe a handful of blogs before. But I was picked up by my agent on Instagram, and I very nearly didn't reply to her DM. And she's from a really amazing literary agency in the UK. And she wrote me on Instagram saying that she wanted to find somebody to do a book on mending. And I'm actually really bad at mending, although, of course, all of my clothes are rigorously mended, either by myself or others. Of course, I have access to that information. So I just replied saying, look, I'm not good enough at mending. There are people and books way, way better than anything I could ever do. I mean, how could anybody do a book on mending after Katarina Radabau? I don't quite know. But I did say that rather than doing a how to mend, that I would have been brilliant at doing a why to mend. And my book is a combination of the two. So it's got silly little things, like illustrations on darning, but the majority of the book is about mending the system. And then, of course, mending my way. I mean, I'm primarily, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, I am a creative soul. So I think creatively, and I do love my clothes excessively. And I do want to make them last. And I have a very strong aesthetic sense, having been a designer. So all of those little bits and pieces, how I let clothes break, how I mend holes using vintage brooches, all of the things that I actually do are also there. And then there are also classic mending ideas from others. But it's a cheap paperback. Lovely. I'm really so pleased with the illustrations and the graphics. And it's available for all to buy. And I'm super proud, and I'm really moved by the reaction that it has generated already.
That's so brilliant. You've got such a wealth of knowledge. So I couldn't think of a better person to write it. My copy's waiting at the local bookshop, which is only open 2 days a week at the moment from lockdown, but I'll get it tomorrow. I'm looking forward to reading.
Ooh, I'm excited that you'll see it.
Of course. What other books do you recommend to people or people?
Oh, it's odd because I'm
a little bit more.
So I read a lot. Well, I've read recently, one of my favorite books on the subject was written by Cassia Sinclair, and it's called The Golden Thread. And it's very much a story of the textile industry. That was very illuminating for me, in the sense that it's just beautifully written, and it's an amazing story, and it reconnects you with an industry that you don't seldom remember as having been this innovative, this female, this huge on our lives. We forget that. We tend to think that fashion is frivolous. It's not. It's a gigantic, massive industry that has been present forever, pretty much the same amount of time as us. The idea of dressing up went from a necessity to something else pretty quickly, I think. So this book was very life-changing for me. Super, super interesting. I don't read that many books on fashion, to be honest. I tend to read literature more. But another one of my absolute all-time favorite is The How to Be a Craftivist by Sarah Corbett. It's so sweet and brilliant. Again, really reconnecting you with what we can do, but why. Another book that I really, really loved when it came out, which was probably the very first one, was Green is the New Black by Tamsin Blanchard. that one still contains things in me that, for me, that are, incredibly valuable, considering how old, what a massive precursor it was. Obviously, Mending Matters by Katerina Radabau, when it comes to mending. I mean, there's just no other book. And her second one is coming out soon. And I mean, those are Bibles if you want to mend. And there's another brilliant one that came out recently from Kate Sekulis, which is called Visible Mend. And that's also really, really cool. And then I quite like one by Frances Corner, which I can't remember what it's called. Oh, God, what a nightmare. Why Fashion Matters, that's it, from Professor Frances Corner. Came out quite a few years ago. That too is also, it was very inspiring for me.
Brilliant. That's a good list. I'll link to all of those in the show notes so that if anyone, hopefully lots of people will be interested and can have a...
Safia Minnie is also a renowned author in this field, but she's written too many. I couldn't possibly mention all of them.
So, Ursula, has there ever been a time in your life where what's important to you or your priorities have shifted in an instant?
Yeah, when I gave birth. I can't think of I think most women that have given birth, that's in that moment, that you no longer you love yourself more than ever. It's every time, and each time they shift according to the character of the child, which again is something you get an inkling straight away when you meet them. So yeah, 4 times my priorities have shifted in an instant. Otherwise, I'd say it takes probably a little longer than an instant for them to shift.
How old were you when you had your first child?
18.
Did you feel young at the time?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think I've ever felt young. I've always felt... it's a really interesting question. I don't think I've ever felt young. I always felt quite invested with responsibility, and I always felt that I could hold my own with adults or children alike. And my desire to have a child was also something to do with almost wanting to stay a child in order to play with this child, to stay a child. So, don't know.
You've always struck me as someone who's so young and so full of energy.
Yeah, in that sense, I'm full of energy, but I always feel like I'm a very old soul. I have this really obsessive interest with history since I was very, very young. And that is something that is so predominant in my life, this looking back, and that for some reason I identify with centuries, not just decades.
Staying very grounded in the past.
Yes, I think so.
Do you feel like you find it easy to say no to things, to prioritize stuff, and to say no to things you don't want to do?
No, and that is a huge issue. I think a lot of people suffer from the saying yes to too many things. Again, in my case, it's not so much a question of priority. My tendency would be to say yes, to say yes to everybody, to be heard by everybody, to speak to everybody. And the main problem I have is that I was trying to explain before, in my neurodivergence, I don't understand the length of time or the space of time, or the size of a space. So I tend to say yes, brilliant, amazing, and then realize, oops, I don't have enough time. So I'm getting a little bit better now. But my hyper availability is 100% part of the person that I am. And the way that Fashion Revolution was built, and my extreme reaction to an industry where no one is available for you because it's always too exclusive. So you need to reach that level before you're considered. I hate that. I detest not looking at people from exactly my same height. Eye to eye. I don't like looking up, just as I don't like looking down. And so I have needed to say yes. I'm very proud that I say yes as often as I possibly can. I will say yes. And it's not about to change. And I don't want it to change. It's just about, occasionally protecting myself within this availability and understanding that, like right now, for instance, it's the demand on me is bigger than it was before. And so I'm slightly struggling to keep a balance.
Are you good at relaxing?
Yeah, I think I do. I mean, I am not a meditator. I can't do that, but I'm very good at relaxing if I dance. I'm very good at relaxing when I read. I am very good at relaxing when I chat to my kids. So it's not, there's more that I should do. I mean, I definitely should be using relaxation more in terms of, within physical exercise, for instance, which I don't really do anywhere near enough. But yes, no, I don't feel that I'm super hyper. I'm also, I suffer from a autoimmune. I used to anyway, it's fine now, but it's called Graves' disease, which affects my thyroid and makes my thyroid be hyperactive. So I am, again, hyper by nature and have been always. But I do think I do it within the spectrum of what I can do. Yes, I do think that I'm okay at relaxing.
I think that's really the key, isn't it? But we were talking about earlier about not feeling burnt out by things and having that capacity to say yes to so much. As long as you feel like your downtime is truly downtime and you're able to switch off, then it's not as if you are working at full speed all the time.
No, I wouldn't work at full speed all the time. I did say a long time ago, I'm really not a workaholic. I don't work just for the sake of working. And I do spend an awful lot of time in my own time. I don't know whether it's downtime. I'm interested in my brain. So when my brain goes into overdrive, I potentially find that relaxing, even though maybe it's not. But, I think that when you get to my age, something happens and you are in a relationship with your body whereby you don't need to necessarily ask permission and vice versa. So I know what it needs. It knows what I need. My mind and my emotions will never be stagnant or stationary. Sorry, I didn't mean stagnant. I meant stationary. My mind and my emotions are hyperactive, and that's just the way that it is. I think my body knows that by now. But there are ways of balancing the two.
Do you have any advice for someone who feels like their mind is stationary? Like they feel a bit
Read.
stuck?
Well, for me, it's books. I don't get it with films or TV as much. I know that for some, that can be, an inspiration. For me, it's, I don't know whether it's generational, but it's books and art. And if my mind is stuck, the only thing that will unstick it is the power of others. And I am very, very, very curious. I just couldn't be more curious. And there is so much power for me in learning what other people are doing, learning what they're writing, what they're thinking. So for me, it's a brilliant unstuck. I know that for other people, it's more like a walk in the park or being with nature. And that does have a profound effect on me as well, especially if I'm in the mountains, which would be my favorite, my favorite place for, I guess, some people do forest bathing. I'm very much of a mountain bather. Mm. But it is definitely about learning and reading and finding out and discovering new things. That's the one that does it for me.
Mm. That's why I love interviewing people, why I love doing this podcast, but just
I'm sure, yeah.
In general, it's the different answers you get to these kinds of questions. I spoke with Rankin, the photographer, last week.
Yeah.
And his was all about boredom, how he wants to be bored and how important that is for his creativity and for...
Oh, I completely get that. I totally understand that. On one way, I've never been bored, not once in my life. But at the same time, what people consider boredom, which I know is not boredom for me, I do understand how bloody important it is. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, Ursula, that was fantastic. It was so great to talk to you. You've definitely inspired me to get my sewing machine out of the cupboard.
Brilliant.
Do some mending. I am the least competent sewer in the world.
Well, there you go. You see, in the book, I'm always making the point that if you're not a competent sewer, find somebody who's way better than you, as I did. I'm a terrible. But it, also advocating to have mending in every supermarket and fast fashion store.
Oh, yeah.
Just to make it easier for everyone.
Absolutely. And we'll look out for your book. I'll link to that in the show notes.
And do link out also with Fashion Revolution Week, which is going to be at the end of April, as usual. I think 19th to the 24th of April. So if as many people as possible can join and take part, it would be brilliant.
Fantastic. I'll link to that and hopefully I'll see some listeners there. Ursula, thank you so much for your time. It was brilliant to talk to you as always.
Thank you so much, Lily. Lovely, lovely, lovely talking to you too.
Take care.
And you.
If you enjoyed this episode of Priorities, I'd really appreciate it if you could make it your priority today to hit subscribe and also rate and review, as this helps other people find it. Need a little incentive? Every month, I offer one free 6-month membership to my online studio, Mindful Moment. All you have to do is hit subscribe, rate, review the podcast, and then email a screenshot of your review to podcast@lilysilverton.com for a chance to win. Thank you so much for listening. Take care.